Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Yiti from Earth to Plates, and in today's video we're going to make some homemade pasta using this flour. We're going to make a pesto chicken pasta, and we're going to make the pasta from scratch. So the recipe calls for a 00 flour, which I couldn't find in my store, but when I did a quick Google search, it said that pizza flour is the equivalent to 00 flour, 0000. This is what I was able to find in my store. Now, if your store doesn't have this, or you can't find 00 flour, here in America, they don't produce flours using those numbers to define those numbers. Like, you can find pastas ranging between 00s to 2, and that tells us how finely ground the flour is. In America, they don't do that. They sometimes will write on the bag the percentage of protein. So if you can't find one of these, or 00 or a pizza flour, then you can look for a flour that is between 11 and 12% protein, and those will work just as well. Now to start, I'm going to measure out 400 grams of the flour. So I have my scale here, and it's set to 0. Now it's set to 0, and we're gonna measure out 400 grams. Now that I have measured out the flour, I'm gonna get out 4 eggs. I have my 4 eggs here. So what we're gonna do now is, actually first I'm gonna put my hair up. I'm just gonna take the flour, I'm gonna pour it onto my surface over here. And we're gonna make a little mountain with an indent in the center for the eggs to go into. And now I'm gonna crack the eggs and put it in the center here. As I was editing this video, I heard a lot of scratchiness on the recordings of the videos. I think it was my hair that was getting in the mic, so I'm sorry for that. Bear with me. I tried to cut out whatever I could. Now let me bring you guys a little bit closer. And first thing, crack the egg yolks. Now I'm going to start mixing it, scrambling it a bit. I'm going to start bringing in some flour from the edges. And I'm going to do this until it starts forming a little bit of a dough. Now that it's starting to come together, I'm going to do this by hand. I'm going to knead it until it forms a nice dough. I don't think I told you guys everything that I'll be making on this day. So while I am kneading the dough, let me tell you like this. So this will become pasta, which will be made into a chicken basil pesto pasta. That's a tongue twister a little bit. Later on, we're going to go out, we're going to harvest the basil, and we're going to make a roasted tomato soup using some garden tomatoes. At this point in time, I was overloaded with tomatoes. There was so many. So I decided, why not give it a try. Okay, the recipe that I'm following did say that if it's a bit dry, to add little drops of warm water at a time to help it come together. Now I still have a little bit of flour here, and I don't see how I would be able to incorporate it without a little bit more liquid. So I have heated up some water before I started in case I would need it. I think I can use just a tiny drop more water. I think now it's hydrated enough, and it'll just be about working the dough. It's not perfect. It's only my second time making it. Technically, we could say first, because it's the first time making it with the proper ingredients. So now before we get rolling this out, cutting it into shape, let me go get some water on the stove to boil so we can cook this. Okay, so I actually misread the instructions on how to do this. So now that the dough has actually come together, we have to form it into a bowl and we have to let it rest somewhere between an hour and up to a day. I'm going to put it into the bowl that we had pre-measured the flour in. And we're going to cover it with some saran wrap and a towel and let it rest for at least an hour. I knew I was missing something. I remembered from last time that it took longer. While the dough is resting, I headed out to the garden and I'm gonna harvest some basil. I'm trying to show you a butterfly over here on one of the zinnia flowers. Didn't want to focus. But here I'm showing you that my basil is planted in between the tomatoes, and I have quite a few plants there, but we're getting nice and big. And we're gonna see how much I can harvest. Hopefully we have enough. And here we go. And we actually got the perfect amount of basil to make the pesto. And then I'm going to go around to the other side of the bed and we're going to harvest some more basil from that side that is also planted in between the tomatoes. Let's go inside now and we're going to go get some tomatoes from our ripening station. Okay, here we are by the tomato station. And we need to get 2 pounds of tomatoes. So I'm going to grab a few and we'll weigh it out to make sure that we have enough. Okay, this is 2 pounds, 0.7 ounces. So we're right on point there. I might actually go grab another one more tomato because most of them have some damage on the tops. We had some heavy rains last week. And this is what it can do to the tomatoes if the tomatoes are almost ready. This one's almost perfect, as well as this one. But these 5 have damage on them. These 5 have some damage on them. So I think I'll go grab one more tomato to make sure that even once we cut this off, we still have 2 pounds. Now, before we get going on anything, I'm gonna wash these tomatoes and I'm gonna wash up the basil so we can make the pesto. While we're waiting for our doughs, so we can continue with the next steps, we're gonna get these roasting for the soup. So the recipe also calls for 1/4 of a medium onion. I'm just gonna use 1 small one. And 6 cloves of garlic. Now, I like to use the pre-peeled garlic, and these tend to be smaller, So I'm just using a few of them that I think would roughly equal 6 cloves of garlic. Over here I have a sheet with parchment paper on it, so we're going to put everything on there. And the tomatoes, the recipe says to cut into thirds. So any of them that have blemishes, I'm going to cut off the top. Otherwise, I'm just going to core it. And cut it into thirds. So apparently all the seasoning will be happening right now, because as soon as this comes out of the oven, we're just gonna combine this with some warm chicken broth or chicken stock, and that's it. So let me move this out of the way so I have an easier time reading the amounts on here. So we're gonna start off with 2 tablespoons of olive oil. 1.5 tablespoons of vinegar. Now the recipe calls for 1 tablespoon of Italian seasoning. I don't have that because I have not always enjoyed the flavor profile. So it says that if you don't want to use that, you can use 1/2 tablespoon of oregano and 1/2 tablespoon of basil. And this is actually basil from the garden, so I figured the more elements of the garden we can incorporate here, the better it'll be. Now we're going to add some salt and pepper to taste. And finally 1 teaspoon of brown sugar. So I'm going to go like that. That shouldn't be 1 clump. And I think I'm actually going to mix it a little bit so that it can all coat the vegetables. Let's lay it out nicely again. And I want the skin side up so that it can brown nicely. Okay, let me wash my hands and this will go into the oven on 375 for 45 minutes. Next up, we're going to prepare the pesto. I have here the basil that we harvested, and it's the perfect amount. The recipe calls for 1 bunch, which equals to 1 cup of basil if it's packed in, or 2 if it's loose. Next up is 1.5 teaspoons of salt, 2 to 3 cloves of garlic, and again I'm using some more because I am using the pre-peeled. Next I'm going to pre-measure 1/4 cup of oil that we will drizzle into the bowl of the food processor as it is mixing the pesto together. I have a container here, and we're going to put our pesto into the container in the fridge so it is ready for us as soon as the pasta is done cooking. I'm going to cover this and put it in the fridge. Now we're going to go back and we're going to finish off the soup. So in the pot here, I've got my chicken stock. It's nice and hot now. And the vegetables have already come out of the oven, so I'm going to put that in here. Now I want to scrape all this spice off of the sheet as much as possible to get it into the final product. Now the recipe says to do this in a bowl, but we're not quite ready to eat. It's still a little bit early. So this will most probably need to be reheated before we're ready to eat. So I figured I'll just do it in the pot. And like that I don't have to dirty up 2 dishes. Okay, now I've got my immersion blender here. And we're going to blend this up. Now, I'll bring you guys closer so you can see what it looks like. And I'll give it a taste test. So this is what it's looking like. Gorgeous color. Let me take it just a little bit. Great flavor. Wow. Thinking if I should add just a little bit more salt. I think I'll do that. But other than that, this is done. And I'll show you guys when we're ready to shape the pasta. Hey guys, it's been a few hours. The pasta dough has been resting. So now I pulled out the flour again because I'm going to lightly flour the surface of this board as we're working. And I have this rolling pin that I have put a ring at the end. And this will help me ensure that the pasta is nice and thin. Now this rolling pin has a bunch of these and each of them gets thicker. So depending on how thick you want this dough or any dough, you can put that size on and it makes it a lot easier to roll out to the right thickness. So let me move this aside. Now I'm going to lightly flour this surface. And here we go. This is our dough. It feels very nice. And I'm going to start rolling it out. I think I should actually cut this in half so it's easier to work with. And I'm going to use my bench scraper to do that. And this I'll actually put back in the bowl until we're ready for it. And you want to keep turning it so that it doesn't stick to the surface. Now I know that this is not thin enough until these rings hit the board. So I'm going to continue rolling this out until we get it to the right thickness. Let's see, next time I have to hydrate it more. And I already have some water on the stove coming up to a boil. Once that reaches a boil, we're going to salt it generously because this has no salt in it whatsoever. And when we cook it, that's the only time that we can season this. So let me get my knife. I'm going to first cut this in half. And I'm going to stack it to make it just a little bit easier. And my bench scraper has a little ruler, so I'll use this as a reference so that they can all be consistently the same size. They're a little bit thicker than I would have wanted. So I think with the next half, I'm going to actually cut it into half again and see if it's easier to work with if I'm dealing with a quarter of the dough. Let's make sure that they're all cut through fully. While we wait for the water to come up to a boil, I'm gonna let this rest in the bowl here, and I'm gonna start rolling out some more. Okay, now that I have this all rolled out and cut, let's go over to the stovetop. The water is already bubbling, and let's get cooking. Now you want to generously salt the water. And now we're going to drop in the pasta and let it cook for 3 to 4 minutes. My timer went off and this should be done. I'm taking out one pasta. I'm going to run it under some cold water and I'm going to check to make sure that it is done. And you're going to see, I'm going to show you how I tore it apart, and the center was still kind of dry. So I let it cook for another couple of minutes. Here you go. It's not very clear. So it still looks kind of dry in the middle. I don't know if you can see it on camera. Yeah, I'm gonna have to let this cook for longer. I cooked it a couple more minutes until I tore apart 2 or 3 pastas and they were all consistently cooked through. And I am straining it out of the water. I'm putting it straight into the bowl that it will be served in. Now that I have all the pasta in here, I'm gonna put in the pesto and toss this together. And then we're gonna go ahead and make the chicken. And we're gonna add that in here as well. This smells delicious. Oh my God, I'm getting so excited. Okay, let me move this pot aside so I can get my cast iron grill pan out here. And we'll get going with the chicken. This water I'm not gonna spill yet because I might wanna add some to this once I put the chicken in here. Okay, so I'm adding the chicken here to this bowl. In here I have a teaspoon of oregano, half a teaspoon of salt, some black pepper, and a 1/4 cup of olive oil. Now I'm gonna toast this together to get the chicken coated. And I see that my grill pan is already hot. So as soon as I get all the chicken in there, I will be able to start grilling them. So now I'm going to take just one piece at a time, drop it onto the grill pan. We're going to let this go until it's cooked. Okay, so I have a cutting board here. I'm going to remove the chicken, put it onto the board. We're going to let it cool for a little bit. Once it's cool, we're going to cut it into slices and add it to the pasta. That piece still needs to cook for a little bit longer. Once the chicken has cooled for a few minutes, I am going to cut into it. The reason why you let it sit for a little bit is because you don't want to let all the juices out. If you cut into it too soon, then all the juices will run out instead of being redistributed into the chicken. By letting it sit, it redistributes, and then when you cut it, it stays juicy. I'm cutting them at an angle so that they are not too long, and width-wise, I'm making them about the same width as the pasta, maybe a little bit wider, so that it's a good size in the mouth. And I'm going to leave a couple chickens uncut for some people that don't want the pesto. I'm going to add it to the bowl. I'm going to toast it together. And while I'm doing this, the rest of the chicken is being cooked. This is only about half of it. Once the rest of the chicken is done, I'm going to let it rest and then slice it and add it. And that will be it. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate you, especially if you've made it this far. And if you have and you want to watch some more videos, I'll link them on the screen for you. And please consider subscribing so you can keep up with everything that I do in the kitchen and in the garden.